Welcome to The Savvy Sauce, where we have practical chats for intentional living. I'm your host, Laura Duggar, and I'm so glad you're here. Have you heard about this one-of-a-kind experience, the Radiant Faith and Wellness event? It's going to take place January 30th and 31st at the Cannery in Eureka. And I hope you learn more or purchase your tickets at mygracioushealing.com/radiant-event or check them out on Instagram at Radiant Wellness Event. And make sure you stay tuned to find out what the code is so that you can purchase your discounted tickets. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm so excited to get to kick off the year with one of the best episodes I can ever remember. You are in for a treat today with my guest, Sue Becker. She is going to enlighten us to the one achievable, easy to implement nutritional change that could change everything. Here's our chat. Welcome to The Savvy Sauce, Sue.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a real honor to be able to share my story, share my message with others that can listen and hear.
Well, it may be one of the times I've most anticipated this conversation, but I'd love to just start by going back. Will you tell us about your professional background and share what led to a life-changing discovery?
Yes. Well, it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll keep it as brief as possible. But so I always say many years ago, headed off to the University of Georgia as a pre-med student. And because I loved studying everything about the human body and I wanted to help people and save the world, all the grandiose ideas. But my big passion was physiology, biochemistry. I loved studying that. Got there and realized, I don't really want to be in school that long and I don't want that type of career after I graduate. I knew my ultimate goal was to be a stay-at-home mom. And I was like, okay, so why am I pursuing this? But I loved the field of study. And so changed my major, got accepted into pharmacy school, spent a quarter there and went, this isn't really what I want to do either. So then I was led by the dean of pharmacy school to the field of food science, which was an up-and-coming industry at the time. I focused my attention more on the microbiology aspect of it. And after graduation, I worked for Kraft Foods for almost 5 years as a bacteriologist in the lab there. I met my husband at the University of Georgia and we married actually our senior year. And so then, like I said, after I graduated, started working for Kraft until I had my first child. I did become a mom for sure. I have 9 children, 7 biological, 2 we adopted later in life, ranging in ages now from 45. My oldest daughter doesn't like me to tell that, but it's too bad. It's what it is. 45 to 29, I believe Olivia is. Yes, 29. And then I have 19 grandchildren, and my very first great-grandchild was born just a few weeks ago. So that's been a real blessing and a real treat. But after graduation, because I loved studying, it's funny, I tell everybody I'm a much better student now than I ever was in college. It's funny how you love to study once you don't have to perform with tests and things. But I continued studying physiology, biochemistry, read the works of prominent biochemists of the day, and kind of came at everything with believing that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Our bodies know what they need. And if they're not getting something they need, then chances are we're going to see sickness or health, lack of health. So I kind of came at everything from that standpoint. It might be a little simplistic, but I think it's a great starting place. So I focused on feeding my family healthy food, supplementing when we needed to. I tell people I grew up Southern. I grew up in a family of cooks and not chefs, but we cooked. We ate real meat, real vegetables. My husband and I loved to garden. We grew our own corn and peas and beans and tomatoes and all the things. So we were eating real food. But we weren't a sickly family for sure, not compared to what others were, but we still had our fair share. And so we clipped along like this. And in 1991, because of my interest in physiology, biochemistry, I subscribed to a publication, and a health journal. And the first publication that came into my home was entitled "How to Greatly Reduce the Risk of Common Diseases." In this journal, the history of white flour was presented. Now, this was very eye-opening information. Maybe I need to back up a little bit. The food science is not a nutrition degree. It's not a home ec degree. It's the study of food processing. You know, everything that has to be done to keep that food safely on the shelf. Some things great, some things not so great. So when I read this information, I was like, how did I miss what's done to our bread? You know, through my studies, I had always read that whole wheat flour was better. And but I didn't understand why. So in this journal, the history of white flour was presented, all the processing that is done to make that flour sit on the shelf forever and ever, really. And this is, like I said, what opened my eyes. I learned that whole grains, real whole grains, are the most nutrient-dense food God has given us. But in that journal, I learned that only when they're freshly milled do they retain all their vital nutrients. You know, like I said, I had read that whole wheat flour was better. I was trying to buy the stuff in the store, but it was kind of gross, nasty, I say. Didn't make nice bread, certainly not fluffy muffins. So kind of gave up on that, trying to make bread with the store-bought whole grain flour. And so we were just buying whole wheat flour from the store. But I learned in that journal, it's not really what you think it is. And so like I said, I also, as a food scientist, what was so enlightening to me, when I read that word enrichment on the bags of flour or the bread products in the store, I thought, wow, we're making this better than it would have been had we not done this favor. I soon learned in this journal that that was not a favor that food companies are doing for us. They replace in their enrichment a mere fraction of the nutrients that are there. And of course, I learned that once the flour is milled, grains are storable. They're left whole and intact. They store fairly indefinitely. But once that grain is milled into flour, it begins to spoil. The nutrients begin to oxidize. So this led to the invention of these huge steel rolling mills that would take out the very nutrient-rich bran, the oil-laden germ that was causing the spoilage of the flour, and leaving only the endosperm part, which is the white flour, protein and starch. Wonderful discovery. This flour won't spoil. It'll sit on the shelf forever. And like I said, it looked like a wonderful discovery. And this all happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s. By about 1910, the steel rolling mills had completely replaced the local millers, because prior to the 1900s, most of the bread consumed in this country, it was either milled at home or the flour was purchased from a local miller. The bread was made at home and it was consumed at home. But with this invention, the steel rolling mills displaced the local millers. White flour, white bread became food now for everyone, rich and poor alike. And can you imagine every housewife going, "Yay, I don't have to mill my flour anymore." I'll never forget, years ago, Brad's 93-year-old grandfather lived with us for a little while, and I was in the kitchen milling some corn for cornbread, and he went like this from his chair. He went, "I milled a lot of corn in my day." So you can imagine people were like, "Hallelujah, we don't have to mill our flour." But what seemed like an amazing, convenient, life-saving discovery actually turned out to not be so great. Shortly thereafter, the steel rolling mills and white flour became food for everybody. 3 diseases became epidemic. Beriberi, which is a vitamin B1 deficiency, it results in nervous disorders. Pellagra is a vitamin B3 or niacin deficiency, results in GI issues, skin issues, dementia, mental insanity. And that one really interested me because I did some more research on that and actually found out that The first case of pellagra was diagnosed right here in Atlanta, Georgia, which I'm from that area, this area. Our store in Woodstock is 35 miles north. That first year, 30,000 cases were diagnosed, and then anemia was the third disease. This puzzled health officials all over the country. They're like, what in the world is going on? Why are we seeing this outbreak of diseases? And at first they thought beriberi and pellagra were maybe some type of infectious disease, but eventually they traced it to the new white flour that was on the market and the missing B vitamins and iron minerals that were provided by the bran and the germ, because for all practical purposes, that's where your nutrients are. The endosperm white flour is protein and starches that we need, but not without the fiber, the B vitamins, the vitamin E, the inositol, choline, the iron, the calcium, all those nutrients. And so things kind of clipped along. They went to the millers and said, y'all gotta put the bran and germ back in because of all this sickness. But the millers were like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen because they had found a very lucrative market for the byproducts, which is so often done now in the food industry. Byproducts of the milling process, the bran and germ were sold to the cattle feed industry, white flour to the people. So they're like, yeah, we're not giving up that money-making market. So things progressed until 1948, and finally the health officials stepped in, the government stepped in and mandated, you've got to fix the flour, you've got to enrich it. And that's where I discovered what a deceptive term that is. For the 35 to 40, who knows really how many nutrients are lost when they take the bran and germ away. They only replaced it with 3 B vitamins and iron. And of course, B1, B2, B3, and iron. Supposedly, this took care of the beriberi and pellagra, but I always have to stop here and say, how many nervous disorders do we have in our country today? How much GI disturbances and bowel issues, digestive issues? How about dementia, mental insanity? What about skin eruptions? I don't think it took care of it, but anyway, they think it did. And then it would take 50 years, 1998, after watching the rising incidence of birth defects and understanding that it was the missing folate that is no longer in the flour, richest food source, or most common, most readily eaten food source of folate, bread. Who knew? So they mandated then that a 5th nutrient be added, and that was folic acid, which, let me stop there and say this. These are synthetically produced supplements, vitamins that are being added to your flour. And particularly the B vitamins, this can be very troublesome because the B vitamins come as a family, they come as a group, they work together synergistically. When you take one out of context from the other out of balance, it actually depletes you and causes you to have a greater need. We're seeing that now with folic acid and the development of MTHFR, the folate reductase gene mutation. So anyway, it's caused more problems than it's worth. And I've always thought about the scripture, Proverbs 14:12, I believe it says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is death. And we can certainly see that. And if that were not enough, now we've taken all this away, we've produced this beautiful white flour, but the residual oils cause it some yellowing. So can't have yellowing of that flour, so they begin to choose to bleach the flour. And a product called nitrogen trichloride was used for more than 25 years to bleach the flour. It was finally taken off the market because they discovered that this nitrogen trichloride caused seizures in dogs. Are you ready for this? Hyperactivity. When I read that information, it was in 1991. That was the beginning of the scourge of ADD and hyperactivity we're now seeing in our children today. And I couldn't help but wonder, when I read that information, there was one little boy in my son's music class, but now Wow, it's pretty prevalent. So then another bleaching agent is benzoyl peroxide. It's known to destroy B vitamins and vitamin E. And let me just tell you this, grains are one of, especially wheat is one of the most nutrient dense food groups, like I said, but it's one of the richest food sources of vitamin E. And no amount of vitamin E has ever been put back in our enriched white flour. So we lost that source. But now we're using a bleaching agent that's going to destroy it and B vitamins. And then potassium bromate is often used as a dough conditioner. It helps strengthen that gluten structure to help get a better rise in the bread. It's known to cause liver issues and thyroid issues. And this is what we were consuming. So, wow. Yeah. Talk about my mind being blown, my eyes being open. And then the rest of the journal was a brief discussion of the common diseases that plague Americans and showed why it was directly related, how it was directly related to our consumption of the processed white flour lacking the nutrients and the fiber. Diseases like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, diverticulitis, even varicose veins, skin issues, low energy. I mean, it just went on and on. And with my background, this made absolute sense. I knew it was scientifically sound, but it was a Christian publication. It was biblically sound. And what changed my life here was, like I said, always read whole wheat flour better, whole wheat flour better. But I was buying the stuff in the store and even whole wheat bread in the store. Didn't really see a lot of difference in it. But this introduced me to the idea of an in-home grain mill, buying grain and milling my own flour. That was life-changing. I was like, this is amazing. I can do this. Wanted a mill. My husband actually bought me a mill for my birthday in 1991. The mill came into our home. I milled flour. I made bread. I ate bread. It was delicious. It wasn't gritty. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't dense. And I tell everyone I pooped the next morning, and it was like, what just happened to me? So that was my life-changing experience. First day, my bowel issues were corrected. I had lifelong issues with constipation, struggled with it, knew I didn't want to take chemical laxatives, so tried to do more alternative solutions, find those, and they worked if I did them, but I tell people they were outside of your realm of daily eating. You had to do something special. And honestly, sometimes I think we look at alternative methods, supplementation or treatment for ailments that are afflicting us, and we're still not getting to the root of the problem. My problem was I was not eating enough fiber. The white bread, the white flour was constipating me. So this was the only change I made. I tell everyone I've not been constipated since 1991. Woohoo! I know you wanted to hear that. But then I had 5 young children by this time. And I homeschooled my children. We were active in church and baseball and music lessons and all the things, we were busy. I had nursing baby but I'm telling you, when I started just adding this bread to our already real food we were eating, I noticed significant energy. Like I said, constipation gone right away. Then I began to notice first week, it didn't take months. I was like, wow, I have more energy. My frequent headaches went away. Also, with my bowels moving, my chronic constipation went away. I lived on antihistamines before bread. Since bread, that's another thing. I can stand here and tell you I've not had an antihistamine or a decongestant of any kind since 1991. That's pretty amazing. I had frequent migraines, not had one since we started the bread. So I've noticed my sugar cravings went away because now I was getting the real carbohydrates that my body needed, and it's sustaining energy. And then my children, I just noticed they would eat and they were satisfied. They loved the bread. They loved the muffins. They loved the pancakes. It was healthy food. I didn't have to coerce them to eat. No more snotty noses, no more ear infections for them. And that we just became a much healthier family. And my kids didn't necessarily catch every bug that came around. And if one of them did get sick, didn't necessarily mean that all of us got sick, which a big family, that's pretty significant, And so it was just, and the bread was delicious. When I read that information about whole grains and how bad white flour was, I was thinking that this freshly milled flour was going to be just like the store-bought whole wheat flour I was buying in the store. And you can probably already tell I'm a very passionate person. So I read this information. I'm like, we're never eating white bread again. White flour's never coming into our house again. And if we have to choke this bread down, we're doing this. Well, we did not have to choke it down at all. The muffins, the bread, the pancakes, the brownies, cookies, everything I made was absolutely delicious. It was filling and it was satisfying. A lot of people would say, you must spend all your time in the kitchen when all my kids were home. I'm going, actually, no. We eat breakfast and everybody's satisfied. Nobody snacks. And even my kids begin to notice how other kids snack all the time. Not my kids. They would eat and they wouldn't eat till the next meal. And so it was just very, very satisfying. So I began to share my bread with everybody, bake bread for other people, take it here, take it there. The next thing I know, so be warned, if you ever start milling and you make bread for somebody, they're going to ask you to make bread for them. So I did start making bread for other people. And the next thing I know, they're coming to me and saying, my cholesterol dropped 85 points and all I changed was this bread. I feel better. I have more energy. And the lady with the cholesterol, I continued to make bread for her for a while. And I always laugh. One of the favorite things she liked that I made for her was cinnamon rolls with cream cheese icing. And she said, I ate one after every meal and my cholesterol dropped 85 points in just 1 month. And I always laugh. I'm like, statin drug with all kinds of side effects, cinnamon roll with cream cheese icing, and she said it was her testimony. She goes, I knew it was the bread. I know it is the bread because 3 doctors, 3 different medications, 3 years, nothing has changed. And this is the only change I made. So I started hearing this. And of course, she told all her friends. The next thing you know, everybody's wanting me to make this cholesterol lowering bread for them, and I'll never forget, by this point, I had had my 6th child, still homeschooling, still doing laundry, still baseball, church, all the things. And here I was making bread for my family and then making bread for all these people coming to my door. And I was spending all day, every day making bread and for others and myself. And I just got really tired, to be honest with you. And I was making this bread and a thought came to my mind. And I just looking back now, I know God put those words in my heart and in my mind. That day, I had also had a few people ask me, would I teach them how to make bread and where could they get a grain mill? So the idea came to me, met my husband in the driveway. And I said, when he came home from work, and I said, you know what? I don't think I'm supposed to make bread for the world. I think I'm supposed to teach the world to make bread for themselves. And that was the beginning. Right there, we sat down on the porch swing and talked about what we would call it. And I said, I want to call it Bread Beckers. That's, it's funny, we didn't know that at the time, but Becker is a German name that means the baker. So it is Bread Bakers. And anyway, so, and it's funny because at that point in 1992, my world was 4 people. 4 people had asked me about where they could get a grain mill and would I teach them to make bread. And today we started our business right then in our home. Took a little while to, get everything. And we outgrew our home by 1998, what my husband and I and my children could do. I mean, it just grew from the testimonies of other people. I mean, just like that lady, and then you get hundreds of people sharing different stories and passing it on. People start noticing. So we incorporated with a longtime friend and partner in 1998, moved the business out of our home. We're currently in this lovely 10,000 square foot warehouse. We moved here in 1999. We have a nice studio kitchen. This is where all my cooking classes take place, that we can seat 100 people, and regularly we fill up classes like that. And we have a lot of online classes already for people to view on our YouTube channel. But and then a few years ago, it's back in 2009, we acquired another warehouse because we are passionate about providing God's people with grain. That first week here, like I said, customer base of 4. a week after starting our business, getting all the license and all that, really hadn't started getting anything. God woke me up and said that he was raising up Bread Beckers to be like Joseph to supply his people with grain. And I wrote in my journal that morning that it would be a tremendous thing. And it would take a few months. We invested in a lot of wheat. We took all of our savings. This was before we incorporated. It was just my husband and I and our family, and bought some wheat, and had spent all of our savings. Well, I got a little nervous, and I woke up that morning after unloading all this wheat and writing the checks and seeing the money go out of the savings account. And I'm like, I don't think the electric company is going to take a bucket of wheat, for payment. So this was my fear. And I felt like, maybe I was being deceived. Maybe we were being misled. And I just cried out to the Lord that he would speak to me and confirm to me that this was what we were supposed to do. And this is how I do it. I just cry out to the Lord, and then I just go on with my regular Bible reading, not looking for something. I could have gone to the story of Joseph because he had already spoken that to me. But my verse for the day in one of my devotionals was Proverbs 11, verse 26. And it says, "Cursed is the man who holds back grain when the public needs it, but a blessing from God and man is upon the head of him who sells it." My husband took that vision. I know you talk about, I was like, what? I could hardly wait for Brad to get up. My husband, Brad, I had awakened early because I was stirring and all just anxious and fearful, and the enemy was just coming at me. And when I shared that all with Brad, he was sleeping next to me, not knowing that I was in all this turmoil. And he just looked at me and he goes, "Sue, I can think of no other verse that God could have given you to answer and your question and to calm your fears." And so he took it to heart. So we now have a second warehouse. It's 13,000 square feet. We are probably one of the largest grain packaging facilities in the southeastern United States. We have hundreds, I don't know how many we're growing every day, co-ops all over the United States. And we bring in 2 semi truckloads a week. I'm sorry, a month, which is actually a little bit more than that. It's about 190,000 pounds of wheat. That's just wheat. Package it down into these great food grade buckets, plastic buckets, and we package it with carbon dioxide gas, so it's perfectly storable. We can guarantee that it's bug free. The enemies of grain are moisture, bugs, and rodents. So that's why we really firmly believe in packaging it all in buckets. And like I said, we have probably 180 co-ops now. I don't know. It's growing every day. We ship wheat all over the country, grain and everything we sell. So it's been a real journey and just a real blessing. And then I started a ministry called Real Bread Outreach. We clipped along locally, kind of providing grain and grain mills for those who truly can't afford it. But then in 2016, God called me to Haiti. I made 15 trips to Haiti. We built a bakery there. We trained up another team of at an orphanage, and they were making bread every day. So right now in Haiti, it's an intense situation, but the bakery is thriving, feeding about 1,200 school children a day, and then the other, it's about 150 orphans. Then we went to Tanzania in 2021. We built a bakery there, started a feeding program. We've helped start a bakery in Israel that is ministering to the Jewish people. We helped train a bakery in Uganda, and we've sent meals to missionaries in Japan and the Philippines and Nigeria and Kenya, just all over. And I'll close this part with this. A few years ago, a friend of mine she remembered, she said, "Sue, do you remember when you said to Brad, I don't think I'm supposed to make bread for the world, but teach the world to make bread for themselves?" And I'm going to tear up a little bit looking back now. Like I said, 4 people, that was my world. Today, it truly is the world. And not just because of the internet, but because of where God has called us through our ministry. And it's a real blessing. So my encouragement to everyone is do the small thing. You never know where God's gonna take you in years to come, and how it's going to bless the world. So
Yes, do I think
that was a lot. I know.
no, that's beautiful. And it makes me think of the verse, "Do not despise small beginnings, for the Lord delights to see the work begin."
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing, but I love
Yes.
how much it has blessed the world. And I remember the first time I heard you, I was trying to just picture what is a mill, but you literally just turn it on and you pour the grain in and it
Yeah.
comes out
Yeah.
as flour. It's so easy. And so we
Yeah.
purchased our own. All after our conversation, I get to stick in our loaves in the oven. They're still rising right now. And now a brief message from our sponsor. Radiant Faith and Wellness Event is a unique event designed to bridge the aspects of faith and wellness and to live as our bodies, minds, and souls were intended and created. So come together with other like-minded women to receive Christ-centered teaching on health and wellness, to nourish your body with good food, to renew your mind and help you shine radiantly. At Radiant, wellness goes beyond worldly standards of wellness and self-help. So from worship and inspiring speakers to guided movement, meaningful conversation, biblical teaching, every part of this event is crafted to help you reconnect and step forward renewed. It's the perfect time of year to experience something like this. Radiant is more than just an event. It's actually a transformational experience and supportive community dedicated to helping women grow spiritually and physically. Their speakers bring this perfect balance of encouragement and deep wisdom, each within their own area of expertise and passion. They do a remarkable job of creating a safe and joyful space where every woman feels seen, supported, and empowered to grow. So join the Radiant Faith and Wellness family today and experience what it means to live rooted, restored, and radiant from the inside out. Visit gracioushealing.com/radiant-event. Or you can check out their Instagram page at Radiant Wellness Event. Tickets are limited, so make sure you book today and enter the code SAVVY, SAVVY, when registering for a special discount. Thanks for your sponsorship. So going back to these ailments, I'm going to reference two other things that you said. First, this may be a little unrelated, but even thinking of feeding people around the world or feeding our children, you mentioned, a lot of times if your kids were picky eaters, you'd say, okay, ditch the bread and just eat the meat in the sandwich. But because it's so nourishing and nutritious and that Jesus has given us this as a grace gift, this bread, you can ditch the meat and eat just the bread and get so much nutritional value.
Yes, that's funny that you bring that up because, one of the things over the years of studying is of the 44 to 46 absolutely essential nutrients needed by your body for health and to promote life, there's only 4 slightly deficient or missing in wheat: vitamin A, vitamin C. So God gave us another kind of food. Remember in Genesis chapter 1:29, he says, I've given you plants that bear fruit with the seed in them. So that's our fruits and vegetables. That's where we get our vitamin A, vitamin C. Then we get our vitamin D from the sunshine, if we get out there and get some. And then B12, of course, is low, or is not found in any plant product. Plant food. So you have to get that from your meats, your red meats and things like that. But that's, and so learning that, you're absolutely right. When my kids were growing up and the bread was, my little toddler, how she'd tell me she was hungry, she would say, I want a roll with honey. That was what she wanted to eat. And I would take the meat off the sandwich, and before bread it was eat the meat, after bread it was just eat the bread, because I knew just from that. And I started thinking about when Jesus said, man does not live by bread alone. He was quoting the Old Testament, but by every word that proceeds forth from the mouth of God. He was reiterating that you think you're living because you have bread, and all the biblical, so many of the biblical feasts, Passover and first fruits, Pentecost, they're around the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. Grain was a big part of their life and of their sacrifices and all that. And he was saying, you think you're living just because you have bread, but I'm telling you, there's a spiritual life that you have to feed as well. So yeah, that was a fun time seeing the change of my perspective of just eat the bread. And some days, breakfast was typically a pretty big meal for us. Sometimes it would just be pancakes, but a lot of times it would be eggs and freshly ground grits and bread of some sort, muffins. And then lunch might be muffins and a smoothie because we really weren't that hungry from the bread at breakfast. And then dinner, we eat normal. People think we're weird eaters, but like I said, I grew up Southern, so we do country fried steak, we do pot roast, we do chicken, we do brown rice, mashed potatoes, green beans. We do it all. And you mentioned something that was funny. When I first started, um, when I would take bread places, people go, "Oh my gosh, this coffee cake is so delicious," or "This bread is so delicious. Can I get your recipe?" And I'd go, "Well, yeah, you can have my recipe, but you've got to understand, I mill my own flour." Two things they would always respond with. And the first one, they would go, "You do what?" And I would go, "I mill my own flour." The second one absolutely intrigued me for years and years until I did a study on what grain mills, the local millers mills, water wheels and grist mills and ox treading out the grain. But they would always say to me, "Where do you live?" And I think they thought I must have had a barn and an ox, or I lived by a river to have the grist mill to power my mill. Now you can see my little mill behind me. It just sits on my counter, and you're right. Turn it on, pour it in, comes out flour in a matter of seconds. And I tell people, it's really not any slower or more tedious than taking your flour canister out of your cabinet. And I realize we've deviated in this day and time from even using flour and baking things ourselves when we can go to the store and buy it already baked. But it'll change your life. I have never seen one dietary change bring so many significant across the board, broad spectrum health benefits to myself, my family, and so many people now that share their testimonies with me. It's just been amazing, just absolutely amazing. And my husband always likes for me to say, in the 25 years of raising my children on this bread, we only had to take them to the doctor twice for an illness, twice, and twice on antibiotics. They needed it. There's a time and place. Twice to the doctor for an illness. In 25 years, there are people and families that go to the doctor more than that in a week. So when people say, "Oh, I can't afford it," or "I don't have time," I'm like, wow, I can just tell you the life-saving and money-saving advantages it's hard to describe. So yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, it's an enjoyable process. It's
It is.
delicious. But also, okay, referencing one other thing, just thinking about these ailments, you had quoted, I believe, a doctor just saying about constipation that is, and I don't want to botch it, so I'd love to know if you remember this, that most Americans, is it 3 out of 5, suffer from constipation or even chronic constipation. And that was it the number one cause of breast cancer and prostate cancer?
Oh, wow. Yes, I'd almost forgotten that. Yes, I was listening to a CD that someone shared with me, and it was by an oncologist. And I still remember I would listen to things as we began to travel and share and teach, and I would listen to teaching. And so I had this cassette, if you can remember, if you can remember those or even know what those are. And I remember where I was. I was on I-10 headed to Jacksonville to a homeschool show, and this oncologist, at the very end of her message, she said toxins are stored in your let's see, let me see. So she said toxins are stored in your fatty tissue. In a woman, it's your breast. And in a man, it's his prostate. And she said when toxins are not carried out of your body daily through bowel elimination, then these toxins get absorbed into the body and stored in your fat tissue. And she said, so a direct correlation between cancer and constipation is there. And and I was just like, what did she just say? And that blew me away. I mean, that was not me saying it. This was an oncologist, and she's saying one of the leading issues is constipation. Wow. Yeah, I'd almost forgotten about that.
Well, and such a simple swap and getting to still enjoy these
Yeah.
foods. But in addition to being healthier and the health benefits and making us feel better, how does this also potentially affect our weight?
Well, that's a good question because we're all told that bread is bad, that bread will make you fat, and I totally agree. The bread that's in the store is devoid of nutrients, it's devoid of fiber that fills you up, it's devoid of nutrients that satisfy, fiber that fills you up, and it's heavily sweetened, sugared. Most of the breads we're eating are not just flour, water, yeast, salt. They're usually loaded with other things. So they're not satisfying. The fiber in real bread fills you up. So, like I said, you're not going to overeat. You're going to eat and you're going to be satisfied. I always tell the story when we were eating just bread from the store. I had 5 children. I would make sandwiches. They would, cut them in half. I would make 5 sandwiches. Or I'd make the whole loaf actually. They would fight over the last one. After bread, real bread that fills you up, I would make 5 sandwiches, cut them in half, and sometimes they would eat them all and sometimes they wouldn't. It was because it was filling and it was satisfying. And that's something people need to understand. Also, the nutritional deficiency in the foods that we're eating in the store, especially our bread, they're leaving us malnourished, really. Dr. Denmark, one of the oldest practicing pediatrician in the country, she lived right here in Georgia, and she said, we're the most undernourished, overfed
Hmm.
people in the world. We eat a lot because we're never satisfied, because the foods we're eating does not supply our body with the nutrients that we need. And so we're constantly craving. I don't think a lot of people don't understand what cravings are. You're craving food because you're needing a nutrient, and so we find that we can eat and eat and eat, or not we, but Americans can overeat, and they do overeat because they're never satisfied. And so real bread fills you up, real bread satisfies. It takes those sugar cravings away, which, a lot of high calorie foods, they're loaded with sugars, and that's what we're craving a lot of times. I read something, women tend to crave sweets and chocolate, and men tend to crave salty. And but both, if we're craving processed foods, it's, you can sit down and eat the whole bag of cookies, where you make cookies from freshly milled flour, one, maybe two. If you go three, you kind of go, I really didn't need that one, so it's just filling, it's satisfying. We have so many testimonies of people saying they've lost. One lady said she lost over 100 pounds. That was over the course of a while, of a year or so, but she did it right. She just started eating real food that nourishes and satisfies.
I want to make sure that you're up to date with our latest news. We have a new website. You can visit thesavvysauce.com and see all of the latest updates. You may remember Francie Heinrichsen from episode 132, where we talked about pursuing our God-given dreams. She is the amazing businesswoman who has carefully designed a brand new website for Savvy Sauce Charities, and we are thrilled with the final product, so I hope you check it out. There you're going to find all of our podcasts, now with show notes and transcriptions listed, a scrapbook of various previous guests, and an easy place to join our email list to receive monthly encouragement and questions to ask your loved ones, so that you can have your own practical chats for intentional living. You will also be able to access our donation button or our mailing address for sending checks that are tax deductible, so that you can support the work of Savvy Sauce Charities and help us continue to reach the nations with the good news of Jesus Christ. So make sure you visit thesavvysauce.com. And throughout the years, you've seen these different trends, from Atkins to paleo, and now a lot of times we're told gluten is the enemy. But I love how you say that wheat can actually be the cure, not the cause. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
And even why some people with just gluten sensitivities may still be able to consume bread that was made with freshly
Yeah.
milled grain.
Right. So, I think what people need to understand is what gluten actually is. And gluten's not really even in grains. It's just an easy way to verbalize it, I guess. So gluten is the stretchy substance that forms from two proteins that are found uniquely in the wheat family of grains. So when you mill wheat into flour and you hydrate it, wet it, mix it, make a dough out of it, those two proteins, gliadin and glutenine, they form this stretchy substance called gluten. Well, it's very important in bread making that you have these two proteins, because when you make a yeast leavened bread, whether it's sourdough or our commercial yeast today, those organisms feed on the carbohydrates, both in the wheat and in your dough, and they produce carbon dioxide gas. So that gluten, those stretchy strands of protein, those two proteins, they trap that carbon dioxide gas, and that's what enables the bread to rise. So it's unique to the wheat family of grain. It has always been there. It's why wheat is the king of bread making and always has been. Who put those two proteins in the wheat family of grains? God did. And just so you know, wheat is not genetically modified, and it has not been altered to produce wheat that has a higher gluten content. What determines the protein content of grain more than anything, which, what did I say gluten is? It's formed from two proteins. What determines the protein content in grain more than anything is rainfall during the growing season. So that's why here in the southeastern United States, we can't make yeast bread making wheat. We can't grow it because we have too much rainfall and it's too warm. So we grow what's called soft wheat or pastry flour. That's why Southerners eat biscuits, because that's the kind of bread that we can make with the wheat grown here. The colder, drier climates in the breadbasket states of the country, they grow the hard bread making wheat. Now, herein lies the problem. When those steel rolling mills came on the scene and began to take the bran and germ out, what did they leave us with? Protein and starch. Those gluten forming proteins and starch are in that endosperm. God never intended us to eat that white flour, those protein and starches, without the vitamins, the minerals, the enzymes, the vitamin E that the bran and germ provide. So therein lies a lot of the problem. And that's what causes so many digestive issues, is that we aren't getting the nutrients and the fiber that will keep our bowels clean and our digestive system moving the way it is supposed to. Now, herein lies the bigger problem, is that in the food industry and the American people's craving for fluffier bread, in the food industry, they thought, okay, we can give you fluffier bread if we take the wheat and we wash it until only all that is left is those two proteins, those gluten forming proteins. They get this stretchy substance and then they dry it and powder it, and they add even more pure gluten forming proteins to that white bread. So now we have an even bigger problem. And even in that whole grain bread, people want fluffy bread. They don't want, coarser whole grain bread. So they check your ingredients. That 100% whole grain bread that you might be already buying, third or fourth ingredient, going to be vital wheat gluten or gluten flour, whatever they call it. And that is greatly upsetting the fiber to flour ratio and causing digestive issues. And then, just the heavily consumption of that bread and, the commercially processed bread is a real problem. So now what we have is people, Americans consuming this bread. Now they have every symptom of something called celiac disease. Celiac disease is real. It is genetic. I am learning. I used to say it's not reversible, but I am learning something, that you might have the genes for celiac disease, but they can be turned on or turned off. So perhaps what is happening is you might have the gene, but now it's being turned on by eating and consuming this high gluten, if you will, bread out of context, not the way God made it. But then also, what is also happening is, so now we have people that have all the symptoms. Well, let me back up and just explain what celiac disease. Celiac disease, true genetic celiac disease. You are born with these genes, the inability to break down that and metabolize gliadin. That's one of those gluten-forming proteins, which the whole wheat family has that. So if you can't break it down, it's going to cause digestive issues, abdominal cramping. It's going to eventually, as that protein gets dumped into your large intestine, your bowel, it's going to lay down the villi. You're going to have leaky gut. You're going to have all these issues. That is true genetic celiac disease. But it affects less than 1% of Americans have those genes and have it turned on for true genetic celiac disease. So what is being diagnosed today? Well, everybody eating the commercially processed, high gluten packed or, bread, they're developing the same symptoms, digestive issues, abdominal cramping, laying down the villi. So they're being diagnosed with celiac disease when it a lot of times is not true genetic celiac disease. And I'm not professing to be a medical professional. I'm not giving anybody medical advice, but here's the good news that I do want to say to you. Non-genetic celiac disease is totally reversible. And the good news is people are finding, some that have been diagnosed with celiac, going gluten-free, been gluten-free for 20 years, they're finding they can eat the freshly milled flour because it has the right ratio and the good fiber and the good nutrients to heal their gut, cleanse their gut, get their bowels moving, cleanse out, so bring that villi back to life, and they're thriving. They're not just tolerating the bread, they're thriving and finding reversal of many, many, many health issues. And another big issue too is people don't understand that for the most part, digestion begins in your mouth, carbohydrate digestion. You chew your food, your saliva mixes with your food, and there's an enzyme, carbohydrate digesting enzyme called amylase. Once you swallow that down in your stomach is where protein digestion takes place. It must have an acid environment for those protein digestive enzymes to work. God knew that. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. He created cells in our stomach to produce acid, brings the pH, if y'all know what pH is, down to 1, very, very acidic, could eat a hole in your stomach. But he also created these cells that produce mucus that lines our stomach and protects it from that high acid. So that's where protein digestion needs to take place. Here's the problem. What is one of the most commonly prescribed drugs in America? Prilosec, Nexium. These are antacids. They're prescribing it for something called acid reflux, which it's only compounding the problem. So these antacids are doing exactly what the name of them describes. They're alkalizing your stomach acid. So what's that going to do to protein digestion? It's going to compromise it. So, yeah, and the real cause of acid reflux is not too much stomach acid. It is actually too low stomach acid. Our body's not getting the nutrients it needs to produce that stomach acid. Now, it's acid enough that when it comes back up in our esophagus, it burns, but there's a little flap that God created right there at our stomach and our esophagus called the epiglottis. Do you know what's, and it's supposed to close so that when that stomach's churning and doing its digestion, that acid doesn't back up into your esophagus, but it closes, it's stimulated to close by the high acid in your stomach. Do you see what's happening here? So we're being prescribed an antacid, which now we don't necessarily get the burn, but there's all kinds of side effects. We've compromised protein digestion, which, what did we say gluten is? Protein. Also, do you know the technical term for an allergy, a food allergy, not a sensitivity or an intolerance? The technical term for a food allergy is an adverse reaction to a protein component of your food. I have never seen so many food allergies as we see today. It's very interesting. Some people are diagnosed with a gluten sensitivity. Well, of course, I think everybody is sensitive to the bread in the store. Some people can tolerate it a little bit better than others, but I know when I occasionally, we go out to a party or an event and we usually avoid bread, but sometimes it's on everything. I know I wake up the next morning and I'm like, I don't feel good. I have a stomach ache. So I think everybody is sensitive to the bread in the store, but we have now hundreds of testimonies of people who thought they had to be gluten-free or say I haven't eaten bread in 20 years because it made me sick. It did this, it did that. And they are finding they can eat the freshly milled flour, even wheat, because it's the right proportions, all the nutrients. One of the amino acids that's found abundantly in wheat is glutamine. Google it and you'll see a lot of health professionals will actually give you glutamine supplements to heal your gut, and it's in the bread. So then part of the other problem that I see then when people think they're gluten sensitive or have to be gluten free, now mind you, if you truly are genetic celiac, you probably will not be able to eat wheat. And I'm saying probably now because I'm learning some things that we can turn those genes off. I don't know, but if you truly are genetic celiac, but that is going to be a diagnosis that probably came when you were young. You were going to always have had symptoms of these. If you are now 20 or 30 and all of a sudden having these issues and you've been eating wheat all your life, chances are you're not true genetic celiac. So that's something you need to look at. But people are finding they can eat the flour, they can eat the wheat. And part of a real concern of mine is when you go gluten-free, if you don't really need to. I've been doing some studying as a food microbiologist. Gut microbiome has been a big topic I've shared, I've taught way before it was trendy on, probiotics and all of that and fermented foods. I've been teaching it since 1992. But what happens that they're finding on these gluten-free diets, it's actually diminishing your good gut microbiome and encouraging the growth of more pathogenic, making you more susceptible to C. diff, E. coli, and other sickness-causing organisms. Then you're going to have those organisms are critical for breaking down food that gets dumped into the large intestine and encouraging digestion and enzymes that they create and all kinds of B vitamins, and I could go on and on. So that is being compromised. The next thing you know, you have allergies to eggs, allergies to milk. These very restrictive diets change that gut microbiome, and they are causing a lot of gut health issues and allergy issues. I've talked to 2 people in the last few months. One lady told to go gluten-free, been gluten-free for years. She, with tears in her eyes, a couple of weeks ago, came down from Ohio, hugged me, and came to our store, just wanted to come to our store. I happened to be here that day. She hugged me, tears in her eyes, and said, I was down to 8 foods that I could eat. Another lady in one of my classes came up and said, I was down to 7 foods that I could eat. So it puts you on a treadmill that I don't think you want to be on when you start very restrictive diets. It's and not just gluten-free, but even, the carnivore and the keto and the paleo, the heavy meat diets. You need whole grains to break the fats down and cholesterol that those foods are providing. And I'm a meat eater. I mean, that's fine. But to exclude the most nutrient dense food group God has given us, in my mind, is very, very dangerous. Let's see if we can get healing and reverse that. I have a podcast and it's the bread stories now. And one of my favorites, and I recommend it more often than any other, is episode 66 with Sarah Valentine. If anybody that I hear of that say they have to be gluten-free or they're celiac, I would say she fit the bill for what surely seemed like a true genetic celiac. She was diagnosed I think she was around 15, or I don't remember her age. She was in high school, I think, but she had always had trouble, even as a little one. And She was diagnosed with celiac, and she said at the end of the podcast, she goes, either God supernaturally healed me or it was a misdiagnosis. But she had been gluten-free for 15 years, I believe it was. And she told me, she said, she had a dairy allergy. She couldn't eat dairy. And she said, dairy I cheated on a little bit because it would just cause me a little discomfort. She goes, I never cheated on gluten. Well, her brother and her mother heard about me, and Sarah was off at college, and they got a mill and started milling because her brother's children had some health issues. I think they have warts, and my wart stories are great. But anyway, bought a mill. She came home from school, and they said, Sarah, we want you to try this. Nope. I can't. Finally, they talked her into trying a little bit. She said she ate it, no issues at all. And she told me on that podcast, she said, I pooped the best I've ever pooped. I had pooped in a long time. The next morning, I slept the best. I had no headaches, had no adverse reaction. And she's become, if anyone, my poster child for, reversing what appears to be celiac disease and being able to thrive on real bread and freshly milled wheat with the right balance of those proteins, starches, nutrients, fiber, enzymes, vitamin E, all the things that bring healing and improve digestion, get the bowels cleaned out and the gut healed. So yeah, it's something that I think excites me the most. And I call it food freedom, because what I'm seeing is people are in bondage. And when you can't eat this and you can't eat that. And I understand there's some. I have a granddaughter that has a true dairy allergy. And I get it. And those are real. And you don't want to, diminish those. But we are seeing so many people that the bread in the store totally disrupts their system and causes all kinds of issues. We're seeing them not only, like I said, tolerate bread made from freshly milled flour, but bring healing.
And that is so much our Lord, that God knows what he's doing in his intentional design.
Yes.
He is all about healing and freedom.
Yes.
And those verses of setting the captives free.
Oh gosh, that was a big one. Yeah.
But also just one real practical thing, as we're talking about gluten and fermentation with sourdough.
Mm-hmm.
This is a two-parter, because if you feed it with white flour or add that, I'm assuming that diminishes effects. And if you feed it with fresh milled flour and then add that to bake it in bread, is that like double the benefits because you've got the fermentation and the grain? Or how does that work?
I can't find any real definitive information. But let's back up and let's talk about sourdough with white flour. There for a while, when we were still traveling back in the probably early 2000s, a lot of teaching coming out going, even celiacs can eat, sourdough bread. And they were making it with white flour and all of this. Is it better than the stuff you're buying in the store? Maybe, but white flour is white flour, and it's still processed. It's still been stripped of all the vitamins, the minerals, and the fiber. So in my viewpoint, it is no better for you if it's kind of a waste of time if you're making sourdough bread with white flour. Now, if you start milling your own flour and making your sourdough with that's a whole nother realm. And like I said, I've done lots of studies. Most what I find when I read is that when we went to commercial yeast, we gave up flavor. So I get that, and that the bread is kind of flavorless now. So I get that a little bit. But as Americans, and especially children, we like our fluffy bread, don't we? Yeah. So kids, don't fret if you're making bread with commercial yeast. That's the way I make most of my bread. But as a microbiologist, and knowing that when those lactic acid organisms feed on sugars, they produce B vitamins. That's like yogurt. Why yogurt has B vitamins and maybe your milk, just uncultured milk doesn't. So I know that increases the availability of those nutrients. So I think there is definitely some nutritional advantages that you take it to a whole new level. But would I say that commercial yeasted bread is not healthy and you can't do that, that you only need to be doing sourdough. You know, I learned to make sourdough from white flour when I was first married, long before milling came into our family. By the time I had my children, I had vacated that. And then when I started milling, I used commercial yeast and have for most of my years. And we saw tremendous health benefits. So I don't diminish one over the other, but I certainly recognize that, yeah, you might have some better nutrient bioavailability. I don't buy into the, that you have to do the long fermentations to prevent the anti-nutrients like phytic acid from keeping you from absorbing minerals, because I've had mineral checks and we've seen people testify that they had to have blood transfusions regularly because they were anemic all their life. They start milling, making their bread with commercial yeast, and they're no longer anemic. And we've seen countless people that. And the same with me. I'm never low in my minerals. So I don't buy into that, but I say, hey, if you feel like you can digest sourdough bread better than commercial yeast leavened bread, I'm not going to argue with you. Go for it. Do it. But I also don't want to put a heavy burden on especially young moms that are like, it's going to take me 3 days to make bread, or it's going to, no, it doesn't have to. So that's kind of my stance on it. Do what works for your family. Sourdough is a rhythm, so you got to kind of get into it. About the time I get into it, we take a trip. I go speak somewhere. I'm gone for 4 days and I'm like, okay, where am I with this? So, that's just kind of my viewpoint and what I want to encourage people. Do what works for you, what you want, what your family likes. I've got sourdough bread rising right now. There's times when I just want, that chewy, that nice flavorful bread. And then there's other times where I want a soft loaf of bread for a good Southern tomato sandwich, or my kids like peanut butter sandwiches, so do what works, do for your family, do what your family is going to eat and love. And, my husband has a philosophy. If it doesn't taste good, it's not good for you. So if your family, your children especially, don't like the texture and flavor of sourdough, some people do, but especially if your kids are used to the bread from the store, that's going to be a hard transition for them. And if they're not going to eat it and balk at it, then it's not going to bring them the health benefits that you're trying to do for your family. So make what's culturally, if you're Mediterranean, make your pita bread, but make it out of freshly ground whole grain. I make biscuits out of freshly ground whole grain. I make my cakes in pie dough because that's culturally what we eat a lot of. So that's kind of my take on that.
That's so good, Sue. And next week, I'd love to get into more of the details of how we actually can implement this into our daily lives. But if everybody's so inspired, they want to take their first step before we come back together next week, where can we go to get started?
So our website is breadbeckers.com. So it's got a lot of information. You can order online. Of course, we have a brick and mortar store here in Woodstock, Georgia. We'd love to have you come. A lot of people are coming, driving in because they've heard me speak online and heard podcasts, and they're coming. And they'll walk in and go, oh my goodness. So we're a full-fledged kitchen store. We sell other things besides grain mills. We sell mixers, bread machines, raw honey, grains, and then of course go to breadbeckerscoop.com. Find a co-op in your area. If you don't find one in your area, reach out to support at breadbeckers.com and see about starting one. We can do it. And then of course we're on Facebook, Bread Beckers, and Instagram. And then my podcast, Sue's Healthy Minutes, you can listen to that on any podcast platform or on our website. So yeah. And then of course, valuable reference tools, my book, The Essential Homegrown Flour Book, and it's got over 100 recipes, a lot of nutritional information, because I told them I can't write a book on flour milling without telling people why. So lots of good information on different grains and how-tos, how to do quick breads and leaven breads. And a lot of people think bread is a loaf of bread. It can be a muffin, a pancake, it can be a pot of oatmeal or cream of wheat or grits or whatever. And then of course, our famous recipe collection. This was the recipes were the ones I developed in 1991. So yeah, so that's where they can find me.
I love it. Well, and that's where we found your location. It's close to where my husband's parents live. And so we loved coming to
Oh,
your store. We had to travel from Georgia back to Illinois. So I'll try and find a picture of what our vehicle looked like, loaded up with hundreds of pounds of grain. I'll put
yeah.
that, let's see, on social media this week. I'll be looking for that. But Sue, I do have one more question for you because
Okay.
we are called the Savvy Sauce because savvy is synonymous with practical knowledge or discernment. And so, as my final question for you today, what is your savvy sauce?
So, my savvy sauce would be keep it simple. It's so easy to get overwhelmed when we're looking for answers, especially to health. So, there's so much information out there, especially in the realm of healthy eating. But as a young mom, I had 5 young children, like I said, when I got started. I started with 4 basic recipes. I found a basic yeast bread recipe that would work for cinnamon rolls, donuts, hamburger buns, regular buns, dinner rolls, sandwich bread, whatever. I had a muffin recipe, I had a pancake recipe, and I had a coffee cake recipe. Those 3 are quick breads. Those you stir up and you bake right away. So I just want to encourage people to keep it simple. I'll never forget this young mom years ago when I used to speak at the homeschool conferences. This young mom raised her hand at the end of my talk and she goes, I just feel so overwhelmed. I'm being told I have to mill my own flour and make sourdough bread and milk goats and have chickens. And I've got a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And first of all, I was like, go away. Don't even be homeschooling a 2-year-old and 3-year-old. Just live life. But I just looked at her. I was like, no, just start with the bread. Jesus compared himself to bread. And I studied the 7 I ams of Jesus. That's in the book of John. I won't go through each one of them. But the very first, he says, I am the real bread of life. He who comes to me shall be satisfied. You want to change your spiritual health, you start with Jesus. Well, I take that analogy over to our physical health. You want to start and improve your physical health, start with the real bread that he compared himself to. Then next thing you know, you might have the energy to milk goats and have chickens and do the next thing. And I've just never seen one dietary change make such drastic, noticeable difference in my health and the health of my family. Just start there and keep it simple.
Wow, Sue, you are truly just a gift, and you're impacting families and generations around the world through this truth that really does set us free. So I'm incredibly grateful for you, and I'm grateful for your passion and your energy and your generosity on this subject. So thank you so much for being my guest today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It is always a real honor to have an opportunity to share what God has shown me.
One more thing before you go. Have you heard the term gospel before? It simply means good news, and I want to share the best news with you. But it starts with the bad news. Every single one of us were born sinners, but Christ desires to rescue us from our sin, which is something we cannot do for ourselves. This means there's absolutely no chance we can make it to heaven on our own. So for you and for me, it means we deserve death and we can never pay back the sacrifice we owe to be saved. We need a Savior. But God loved us so much, He made a way for His only Son to willingly die in our place as the perfect substitute. This gives us hope of life forever in right relationship with Him. That is good news. Jesus lived the perfect life we could never live and died in our place for our sin. This was God's plan to make a way to reconcile with us so that God can look at us and see Jesus. We can be covered and justified through the work Jesus finished if we choose to receive what He has done for us. Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. So would you pray with me now? Heavenly Father, thank you for sending Jesus to take our place. I pray someone today, right now, is touched and chooses to turn their life over to you. Will you clearly guide them and help them take their next step in faith to declare you as Lord of their life? We trust you to work and change lives now for eternity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, you are declaring Him for me, so me for Him. You get the opportunity to live your life for Him. And at this podcast, we're called the Savvy Sauce for a reason. We want to give you practical tools to implement the knowledge you have learned. So you ready to get started? First, tell someone. Say it out loud. Get a Bible. The first day I made this decision, my parents took me to Barnes & Noble and let me choose my own Bible. I selected the Quest NIV Bible and I love it. You can start by reading the book of John. Also, get connected locally, which just means tell someone who's a part of a church in your community that you made a decision to follow Christ. I'm assuming they will be thrilled to talk with you about further steps, such as going to church and getting connected to other believers to encourage you. We want to celebrate with you too, so feel free to leave a comment for us here if you did make a decision to follow Christ. We also have show notes included where you can read scripture that describes this process. And finally, be encouraged. Luke 15:10 says, "In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The heavens are praising with you for your decision today. And if you've already received this good news, I pray you have someone to share it with. You are loved, and I look forward to meeting you here next time.